'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All the whimsy were the boardwalk coves and the mumraths out grey.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis Carroll Society of North America's Great Debate, Wonderland versus Looking Glass. Now, this event has been getting a lot of buzz online, and it stands to reason because today 4 Carrollian titans will amicably argue and decide once and for all what is the more scholastically significant, culturally compelling, engrossingly eloquent, and all-around better book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. And when all is said and done today, that's it. No more discussion. The better book will be decided, and the winning team will get bragging rights for the next approximately 150 years. My name is Heather. I'll be your moderator with the mostest today. My Carrollian credentials include a website and a podcast called Alice is Everywhere. I'm also the chairwoman of the Senior Common Room Curators. That's the committee that brings you these LCSNA virtual events every single month. But you know what? Enough about me. Let's get to know our intrepid debaters. In the Wonderland corner, wearing the checkered pants and fancy tie, he's a writer, a teacher, a playwright. His plays for children have been performed over 5,000 times. His books have parked themselves on the New York Times bestseller list. Don't miss his latest novel, Escaping Dreamland. His podcast is called Inside the Writer's Studio. He's a past president of the LCSNA. It's Charlie Lights Out Lovett. Also in the Wonderland corner, wearing the crown and the great wig. He's a professor of children's and adolescent literature and culture and Victorian literature and culture. He literally wrote the book on teaching the Alice stories. The Place of Lewis Carroll in Children's Literature, published in 2009, examines how the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland significantly changed literature for children and publishing. Please welcome the pride of the Illinois State Redbirds, Dr. Susina. Now in the Looking Glass corner, wearing the undone shawl and the dangerous brooch, she was a librarian for 37 years at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, where she was also the manager of the Fine Arts Department and later the Humanities Department. She edited the Song Index of the Enoch Pratt Free Library, published in 1998. She got her first copy of the complete works of Lewis Carroll in 1968, and she's never looked back. She cross-stitches Alice-inspired pieces in her spare time. She may be from Charm City, but tonight she is all business. Welcome, Ellie Luchinsky. Also in the Looking Glass corner, wearing the tin armor and the little deal box, he's the author of over 100 hours of radio drama. He's written and presented hundreds of radio documentaries, features, and weekly programs. He is widely known as the author of many making of film books, including those for the Harry Potter series and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He's currently the president of the Lewis Carroll Society in the UK. You wouldn't believe the negotiations we had to go through to get him here today. Say hello to Brian the Bone Crusher Sibley. Did you like that little boxing style there? I worked on that for a while. A big thank you to both teams for being here today, and also a big thank you to Mark Russell Richards for suggesting this debate, to my fellow Common Room curator Dana Noon for recruiting Team Looking Glass, and to all of you for submitting so many great debate questions, especially Claire Imholtz. She sent so many. Rules of engagement for today. There will be 4-minute opening statements. Teams will get 2 minutes to answer questions with 42-second rebuttals from the other team, because I had to. 42, 42, you know. Then there will be a lightning round of quick fire questions and then closing statements. Team Wonderland won the coin toss and will address you first. May the best book win. Susina, take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Like everyone on this webinar, I'm both pro Wonderland and pro Looking Glass. I also believe it's important to separate the two Alice books and judge each on its own merits. Like the Frog and Fish Footman, too often the two Alice books have gotten tangled together. The 150th anniversary of the publication of Looking Glass is an excellent time to consider the two Alice books independently. Nevertheless, Wonderland remains the more significant and better written of the two Alice books. Wonderland is credited for shifting children's literature from didacticism to entertainment for younger readers. Elizabeth Crisp has shown that with the initial reviews of the two Alice books, Wonderland earned almost unconditional praise, while Looking Glass was generally reviewed as less successful than Wonderland. I agree with C.S. Lewis in his assessment, Three Ways of Writing for Children, that a children's story which is enjoyed only by children is a bad children's story. While the Alice books have always had the dual audience of children and adults, it should be acknowledged that they were written and published as children's books and have had their greatest impact in children's literature. Wonderland continues to outpace Looking Glass in terms of popularity. John Linseth and Alan Tannenbaum's Alice in the World of Wonderlands, the translations of Lewis Carroll's masterpiece, has found by 2015, Wonderland had been translated into 174 languages and was available in over 7,000 editions, while Looking Glass had only been translated into 65 languages and appeared in little over 1,500 editions. In addition to the translations of Wonderland, Carroll published Puzzles from Wonderland in Aunt Judy's magazine, the facsimile edition of Underground, his prototype of Wonderland, the Nursery Alice, the Alice in Wonderland postage stamp case. All that Looking Glass got was a biscuit tin and the second act of Alice in Wonderland, A Dream Play. According to LitHub, Wonderland is ranked the 35th most discussed book on the internet. Looking Glass doesn't even appear on the list of 275 most discussed books. Wonderland is the clear favorite of both Carroll and his readers. There are multiple reasons for Wonderland's continued popularity. Wonderland has a compelling publishing history, from the spontaneous oral tale told to Alice Little during the boating trip, to the self-illustrated Underground, to the carefully designed edition illustrated by Tenniel. Even Carroll's decision to recall the first edition of Wonderland is a story that thrills book collectors. On the other hand, Looking Glass, or Alice 2, as Carroll sometimes referred to it, is primarily a sequel based on the success of Wonderland. Wonderland features some of Carroll's most memorable characters and episodes. Readers are introduced to the White Rabbit, the Dodo, the Caterpillar, the Cheshire Cat, the Duchess, the March Hare, the Hatter, the Griffin and the Mock Turtle, and the Queen of Hearts. Wonderland features Alice's famous changes in size, the Mad Tea Party, the confrontations with the Caterpillar and the Cheshire Cat, and playing croquet with a flamingo. Most importantly, in Wonderland, Alice is struggling to discover the answer to the great philosophical question, who in the world am I? Looking Glass is a more complicated book, and it makes it more appealing to older readers, but it has some structural flaws. Unlike the dream frame of Wonderland, the complicated chess moves really don't work, as Carroll acknowledged. He abruptly wraps up Looking Glass with a chaotic dinner party and leaves it to the reader to decide whether it was all Alice's dream or the Red King's dream. As George Orwell has written of Charles Dickens, Looking Glass is all wonderful fragments, all details, but rotten architecture. The key metaphor of Looking Glass is the mirror. While Looking Glass is a clever reflection of Wonderland, without Wonderland, there would be no Looking Glass. Thank you.
Excellent opening statement. And I believe that Brian will be giving the opening statement for Looking Glass. Is that correct? And I will.
Correct.
There we go. All right.
When the organisers of this debate advertised the event using an illustration from Through the Looking Glass as opposed to Wonderland, I was tempted to read that as an omen. But let's not count our jub birds before they come home to roost. First book, as Jan claims it is, and indeed it is, doesn't necessarily equate to better. And if proof is needed that Looking Glass is a better book than Wonderland, let me take you back to the year of 1886. Jan's already mentioned this event, the first stage version of Alice, with which Lewis Carroll was so intimately involved. Although entitled Alice in Wonderland, the play's success was entirely reliant upon Looking Glass providing the production's climactic second act. Indeed, consider the many stage, television and film versions of Wonderland that have pulled in looking glass characters like Humpty Dumpty, the Tweedle Twins, the Walrus and the Carpenter and the Jabberwock in order to bolster up otherwise weak storylines. Mr. Tim Burton even went so far as to axe the Wonderland's Queen of Hearts in favour of the Red Queen. Of course, Wonderland has been leeching off Looking Glass for 150 years. Think of all those publishers annually turning out new editions of Wonderland. Who can resist having Looking Glass in it to bulk out the book to a decent length and boost sales, while at the same time, and this is a salient point, inevitably diminishing Looking Glass's individuality by robbing it of its title? But our case doesn't simply rest on such commercial foibles and eccentricities. We have, we believe, Looking Glass's superior literary merit on our side. Unlike Carroll's rambling telling of Alice's random exploits in Wonderland, totally lacking in structure and narrative development, his account of her Looking Glass expedition is constructed with a novelist's understanding of the disciplines of form and style, the importance of a strong delineated plot line, and a character central to the story who knows where she's going and has a really clearly established motivation. Unhindered by those grotesque physical distortions and psychological traumas to which he was subjected in Wonderland, the Looking Glass Alice presents a personality that is calm, focused, and emotionally developed. The other characters, well, with a couple of behavioral lapses, are far more tolerant and tolerable companions than those mean, fractious, boorish, maddening Wonderlanders. The book's inventiveness is not just bolder, freer, and wilder than that of Wonderland, it's frequently proto-surreal. Consider those elephant bees and Humpty Dumpty's absurdist rhyme about the little fishes. The wit is wittier, the verses are funnier, the puns are, well, punnier. And perhaps most significantly, Looking Glass, amidst all the rich humour, has moments of intense and poignant reflection and others of challenging philosophic argument and bold metaphysical speculation. Think of the wood where things have no names and the Red King's Dream. The illustrations by Tenniel are even better than his illustrations for Wonderland, being uninhibited by Carroll's manuscript pictures to the conversation in Alice's Adventures Underground. Similarly, the author, finding himself 7 years on, less enthralled to the demands of that child of the pure unclouded brow featured in the book's prefatory poem, is now liberated enough to write a story that is as much for himself as to meet the demands of his elusive dream child muse. Apart from all of which, it is a fact that 9 out of 10 Bandersnatches asked said they preferred Looking Glass to Wonderland because they appear in one of the poems, and no one ever argues with Bandersnatches. Well, you know how frumious they are.
Strong words, Brian. And by the way, of course, I meant to do that pre-debate poll before anyone started talking, so I hope you didn't let anything color your opinion that had been said in the opening statements. Now we're going to get to our questions. Oh, if you just Zoom housekeeping notes though, make sure you choose everyone from your chat dropdown, or else only the panelists will see your wonderful comments. So you just have to select everyone. And also I'm seeing a message from someone who's a little frustrated saying that they can't get on. But if you're messaging me, you're here. So I'm not sure how to help out in that situation. So I hope that all got ironed out. All right, now to our first round of questions. And again, our panelists did get these ahead of time. So they had some time to prep for this. And I promise you, if some of the questions seem a little loaded, they are not going to favor one team or the other. Everyone is getting an equal number of completely provoking questions and absolute softballs. So Team Wonderland, you will go first because you won the coin toss. Let's see here. With its chess theme and its journey to become a queen, Looking Glass clearly contains a much stronger framework than Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Does Wonderland suffer from a lack of structure compared to Looking Glass?
Well, I'm prepared to answer that question. First of all, by saying, just holding up my balderdash sign, which I'm sure I'll have to do frequently today. I think it's absolutely untrue, the statement you make at the beginning of that question, that Looking Glass has a better structure than Alice. Alice, in fact, almost single-handedly invents a new structure for novels, the stream of consciousness dream narrative that we see again and again throughout 20th century literature. a rather brilliant thing that it's done, and it makes it clear that this is a dream at the end. There's a surprise ending to tell us that it was a dream. We didn't know that was coming. I remember as a child being stunned to discover that Alice had been asleep and dreaming this whole time. And yet it proceeds as a dream with these very stream of consciousness transitions. Looking Glass, on the other hand, is this very labored structure which attempts to be both a dream and a chess game. And I don't know anyone who dreams in the form of a chess game. And in addition to that, Dodgson says himself, he admits that it doesn't work. Let me read to you from the preface to the 61st Thousand of Through the Looking Glass, from a copy of the 61st Thousand of Through the Looking Glass. As the chess problem given on the previous page has puzzled some of my readers, it may be well to explain that it is correctly worked out so far as the moves are concerned. The alternation of red and white is perhaps not so strictly observed as it might be. Well, what he's saying is that I tried to structure a book around the rules of chess, and then I ignored the rules of chess while trying to structure the book around the rules of chess. So I would certainly say that with the one thing I would also add to that is I believe, sort of contrary to what others have said, that Alice has a much more compelling character arc in Wonderland. She begins the book as a completely helpless child falling through the darkness, and she gradually gets control over the world around her, over herself, over her size, so that by the end of the book, she is speaking truth to power and bringing down an entire royal house.
All right, you've got about 10 seconds left. Jan, do you have anything to add to that, or did Charlie cover it?
Charlie really covers it. I mean, you know, in some ways, I think there are really structural flaws to Looking Glass. I mean, the attempt to make the 12 chapters with 2 chapters basically like an illustration and a sentence really weakens the book.
All right, time's up. Thank you. All right, do we have a rebuttal? A 42-second rebuttal, Team Looking Glass? And I will say, and this won't take up any of your time, that a panelist who shall remain nameless said to me, these questions can't have rebuttals. And I said, well, anything has a rebuttal if only you can find it, or something to that effect. So go ahead, and you will have to unmute yourselves and let us know what you're thinking.
Ellie, it's difficult to rebut something which we sort of rebutted in advance, or I did in some of the things that I said. I think that the dream structure, which you laud as being part of the power of Wonderland, is actually in a sense a cop-out, and that cop-out probably applies to both books in that sense. I think as a child I actually yearned to think that there really was a Wonderland, like there really is a Narnia, and there really is a Middle Earth. Ellie?
Brian, you can stay unmuted because I believe the next question is yours.
Okay.
So many more illustrators choose to illustrate Alice's Adventures in Wonderland instead of Through the Looking Glass. Why is that?
Okay, let me explain this to you now. Although only 7 years separate the publication of Wonderland and Looking Glass, their later publication was significantly impacted by changes in British copyright law. When the text of Wonderland came out of copyright in 1907, Tenniel was still alive, so the copyright in his illustrations remained protected, meaning that any publisher who wanted to produce a new edition of Wonderland needed to commission new illustrations. By 1911, when one might have expected the copyright of Looking Glass to expire, UK copyright law was changed to 50 years after the author and artist's death, meaning that Looking Glass text remained in copyright until 1948 and Tenniel's illustrations until, believe it or not, 1961. However, that law change did allow for works to be reprinted during the last 25 years of their copyrighted life on payment of a royalty, meaning that for a fee, any publisher could use Tenniel's pictures rather than bothering with any new ones. Trivial issues such as British copyright law didn't inhibit American publishers, of course, and as a result, their illustrators easily stole a march on their British counterparts. But in Alice's homeland, copyright inhibitions clearly ruled out editions of Looking Glass illustrated by Arthur Rackham, Charles Robinson, and others who, by 1948, were either dead or had retired from illustrating. Another possible reason for fewer Looking Glasses is the frequent inclusion of Wonderland in popular children's classic series, with room for only one work by each author. So Tom Sawyer might be published in the series, but not Huckleberry Finn. And I doubt anyone would use that as an argument for saying that Tom's book was better than Huck's. Apart from all of which, it may be that for some would-be illustrated, the slidey toes of the Tulgey Wood and oysters with shoes but no feet were, as a wasp in a wig was for John Tenniel, altogether beyond the appliances of art.
You got me with that Tom and Huck comparison, I gotta say. Wonderland, do you have a rebuttal?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, you know that somebody who's arguing that the sequel is better is always going to come at you with Huckleberry Finn because it's the only time it ever happened. Okay, so let's just get Huck off the table. You know, I wasn't told we were allowed to bring a lawyer to the debate, and that it was going to devolve into discussions of copyright law. So I'll just say Salvador Dali.
Okay.
Excellent. Hard to argue with that. All right. Next question for Team Wonderland, I believe is for Jan. Which book has the most famous chapter and why?
Well, to paraphrase Humpty Dumpty, didn't you think I knew the answer to that? It's an easy riddle. Clearly, it's A Mad Tea Party from Wonderland. In many ways, you have the absolute wonderful grouping of, you know, the Hatter, the March Hare, Alice, the Dormouse. You have the very famous Hatter's riddle, you know, why is a raven like a writing desk? There's all sorts of wordplay and puns. And in fact, I think one of the better parodies of the poems, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat. It may be the stupidest tea party that Alice ever attended, but I think it is the best chapter. I think it's the best chapter of both Alice books. My runner-up would be Pig and Pepper, simply because you have that interaction with the Cheshire Cat and you have those wonderful matched illustrations where you get to see the Cheshire Cat vanish.
Charlie, anything to add to that? Got a little
Well,
time
I mean,
left.
I certainly agree. I think when you see films and plays of the Alice books, even if they include scenes from both books, that the one scene that is absolutely going to be in every single one of them is the tea party. I think if you ask someone on the street, tell me a scene from a book by Lewis Carroll, they're going to say the Mad Tea Party. The Hatter is iconic. You'll note that he's changed the price on his hat to 55.5p because after 1971 we got rid of shillings and pence. But nonetheless, I think I have to agree with Jan on that.
Looking Glass, do you have a rebuttal?
I think we could say, yeah, Ellie, go.
All I can say is that you have apparently not read any books on linguistics or any discussion of language whatsoever, because Humpty Dumpty pops up in every single discussion of linguistics I've ever been part of, read about, or heard of. Not to mention the fact that Humpty Dumpty's poem is far superior to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat. Brian?
I absolutely agree. And coming close behind that, since Jan had a follow-up, the Tweedle Brothers, because that's got The Walrus and the Carpenter, which is one of the best poems that Lewis Carroll ever wrote.
All right. Ellie, I believe you are next up for Team Looking Glass. Which book has the more exciting opening? A fall down a rabbit hole or a 5-minute conversation with kittens?
Well, nice loaded question, I must say. In the opening of Wonderland, Alice is, by her own admission, feeling sleepy and stupid and doesn't have enough motivation to make a daisy chain. Even the sight of a rabbit wearing a waistcoat and muttering in English doesn't really stir her to action. It takes a rabbit who can not only tell time, but has a watch to tell it with to motivate her. Alice has no idea of another world and accidentally discovers Wonderland only through carelessness, falling down a rabbit hole and chasing a hapless and tardy rabbit. In Looking Glass, before we even enter the cozy room of kittens, wool, and chess pieces, Carroll prepares us for Alice's travels by listing the chess moves that will win the coming game. As the story begins, Alice is awake enough to work at winding yarn and to watch Dinah wash the white kitten. She gives a good argument against the black kitten for being the mischief maker. She even discusses a chess game, hence foreshadowing her coming adventures, and speculates about the mirror world and how it would function. Finally, she enthusiastically seeks this other world and enters it voluntarily and with intellectual curiosity.
All right. Anything to add, Brian? There's about, I don't know, 20 or so questions or seconds left. Sorry.
By the time I've unmuted, probably not. I think that the opening of Wonderland, because it is so abrupt and so quick, that also takes you by surprise, okay, but it really doesn't build to an opening, which in Looking Glass it really does.
All right. And Wonderland, do you have a rebuttal? And I believe I cost you a rebuttal earlier. I apologize, but Charlie, I think you managed to work it into your answer. But do you have an official rebuttal for Ellie's response?
I would say that the opening of Alice is a reflection of childhood and children as they really are. They observe the world around them, something piques their curiosity, and they react to that by taking action. Whereas Through the Looking Glass is the reflection of childhood as the way Lewis Carroll wishes it was. A child sits quietly in a chair and thinks about things. And so while I think there's merit to both of those as far as reading a book, especially if I were a child reading a book, I'm certainly much more engaged by the former.
And if I could add, the other thing that I think the opening chapter of Wonderland has is that famous, what is the use of a book without pictures and conversation, which defines both Wonderland and Looking Glass and really sets up the importance of visual as well as textual information in a good children's book.
Excellent point. All right. I believe Charlie is up next for Team Wonderland. I put true or false in front of this. I think I'm going to leave that part out. Is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland way too childish and just for kids, and Through the Looking Glass is smarter and for grown-ups?
Well, I think to answer that question, I would refer to my childish self. And I encountered Alice and then Through the Looking Glass originally through the wonderful recordings by the British actor Cyril Richard. And I would listen to the Alice recording over and over and over again. And the Looking Glass recording, I rarely got around to turning over the first record to hear side two. And so I think that that's something to be said about that. That doesn't mean that about how they appeal to children. So I think my argument would be that Alice appeals across age ranges. Alice can appeal to very small children. It certainly appealed to me when I was a small child, but it has things to say to the adolescent. It has things to say to the young adult. Has this things to say to the middle-aged man, and it has things to say to the old fogey like me. And whereas Looking Glass, I do think is more adult. I think, you know, in the description we just had of the openings, we see sort of a very active child hopping up, chasing after a rabbit, doing something, responding to the world around her. Whereas in Looking Glass, we see a slightly more passive way of doing things, sort of thinking first and then taking action later, which is a more adult way of acting. And I think we see the most memorable younger characters, perhaps in Alice. We don't know the ages of a lot of the characters, but many of them act sort of childish. Whereas in Looking Glass, we encounter much older characters, more authoritarian characters like Humpty Dumpty and like the White Knight, who seems to be, you know, sort of almost daughtery. So I would argue that while both books appeal to adults, that the appeal of Alice to children is stronger. And I think that is borne out by the statistics that Jan quoted earlier. When the books were originally reviewed, both being reviewed as children's books, Alice was seen as a more effective children's book than Looking Glass.
All right, and you used your time exactly there. So Jan, I hope you didn't have anything to add. Now, Team Looking, all right, Team Looking Glass, do you have a rebuttal?
Ellie?
Ooh, you got on mute.
I was waiting for Brian to go first.
Okay. Well, the point about Alice being the characters in Alice in Wonderland being more childish, I really don't think it's the case. They seem to me, and they rather intimidated and scared me as a child, because they really are cantankerous and really rather unpleasant, not just to Alice, but to each other quite often. And I find that really rather strange to have an appeal, whereas the characters in Looking Glass, and they aren't actually older than the ones in Wonderland. It'd be hard to find anybody looking more cantankerous and old than the Duchess, for example, or the Mock Turtle. Those characters in Looking Glass, I think, are more mature, and the relationship between Alice and them has a maturity. Now, maybe that isn't as appealing, but I think it is a reason for its appeal.
Not to mention the words of a famous review of Wonderland, a stiff, overwrought tale.
All right. Now, Brian, I believe you are up next for Team Looking Glass. I think this might fall under the category of softballs. Which book has the better poetry?
Well, obviously, Looking Glass. Why? Well, with one partial exception, the poetry in Looking Glass is original, unlike Wonderland's facetious parodies of now long forgotten poems. Even that partial exception, as Sitting on a Gate, or whatever name you want to call it by, owes merely a passing connection with works by Wordsworth and Thomas More, and is a sustained masterpiece of nonsense writing. Public polls and internet ratings show Looking Glass verse as being unquestionably ranked among the world's best loved poetry. And on those rare occasions where a poem from Wonderland makes it onto such a list, it is invariably far lower rated than the verses from Looking Glass. And this popularist assessment is well supported by literary critics. Roger Lancelyn Green introduced his 1956 anthology, The Book of Nonsense, a companion volume to the combined Alice stories, by excusing the inclusion of 3 poems found in the Alice books because, he said, they are so much the best of their kind ever written that they couldn't possibly be left out. And those poems were, rather obviously, I think, Jabberwocky, The Walrus and the Carpenter, and The Aged Man. Raymond J. Rundus in the English Journal in 1967 wrote, "To the linguist, to the semanticist, to the folklorist, Jabberwocky has inescapable attractiveness." And talking about what the young Charles Dodson's teacher at Richmond Grammar School referred to in a report as the boy's creative forms of his own devising, Alberto Manguel speaks of Jabberwocky as being the highest point of Carroll's own devising. And finally, I'll leave it to Martin Gardner, who wrote, "Few would dispute that Jabberwocky is the greatest of all nonsense poems in English." So there's glory for you.
Team Wonderland, do you have a rebuttal to that powerful argument? Ooh, Jan,
you need to unmute yourself. Jan, you're muted. Okay, well, while Jan figures out to unmute himself, I'll just do very quickly. I won't argue the point that the poems in Looking Glass are better, but I will argue the point that the poems in Alice are better integrated into the book. Looking Glass has these wonderful standalone poems, especially Jabberwocky, which I might add he began to write many, many, many years earlier, and The Walrus and the Carpenter, whereas the poems in the Alice book almost always fit the scene. We sing about the lobster quadrille because we're dancing a lobster quadrille. We sing about soup because we're a person who gets made into soup. When Alice is put on the spot to recite things like a schoolgirl should recite, we have parodies of things that a schoolgirl should recite. When we have a hatter talking at tea time, he talks about a tea tray in the sky. So I think while the Looking Glass poems are better, the Alice poems are better integrated into the novel. And let's remember, these are novels, not poetry collections.
I figured out how to unmute myself. And again, just to follow up, in fact, Jabberwocky and Walrus and the Carpenter's, poem are independent of the story. They're kind of shoehorned in. And they really, Alice picks out a book and reads the poem, and it has really nothing else to do with the text. We have the recitation by Tweedledum and Tweedledee, where, as Charlie said, the poems in Wonderland are a part of Wonderland. Those poems are standalones. I think Carroll knew that as well.
Right. Powerful rebuttal as well. And I'm really excited because it's time for the lightning round. Now, I know I said each person can have up to a minute to answer, but I'm really hoping I welcome everyone to be unmuted, and if it sparks a discussion, I'm certainly going to let it keep going. I'm not going to cut you off after a minute. So this is going to be a little chaotic, kind of a free-for-all, but I think it's going to be very fun. And I'm just going to call on people in the order that I see them on my Zoom screen. So first of all, oh, and also these questions, I kind of realized that all of these could literally be answered with just like, yes or no. Like, does your book have better puns? Yes, it does. But, you know, hopefully we'll get a little more elaboration than that, maybe some examples, that kind of thing. And speaking of puns, Charlie, does Wonderland have better puns than Looking Glass?
It's such a hard question to answer because there's so many puns in Wonderland that I have to focus on just a few to talk about how it's the greatest collection of puns in English literature. I think I have to focus on the ones that are the most meaningful to me. I think, went to a school that taught ambition and distraction. So the list of things that are studied under the sea are very relevant to me. But I also love the Duchess's point about if you take care of the sounds, the scents will take care of themselves. Not only is it a parody of a saying, take care of the pence and the pounds will take care of themselves, but I think Dodgson, in a way, very cleverly reverses it again when he does get to Looking Glass, because if you look at the poem Jabberwocky, it is certainly an example of taking care of the sounds, and the scents will take care of themselves.
Excellent. And just a reminder, everyone in the chat, you have to pull down everyone. It defaults to hosts and panelists, but if you want everyone to see your comments, you have to change it to everyone. And I know everyone wants to hear what you have to say. All right, Charlie, that was a pretty good start to the lightning round right there, I gotta say. Brian, Sibley, which book is the more stylish? And I bet you know who this one comes from. It's Kira Vaklovic.
It's difficult perhaps to say which one's the most stylish. I'm just trying to, for me, Looking Glass, partly because I'm on that team, but Looking Glass is the more stylish for all kinds of reasons. Partly for the way in which the language is so much more richly worked. We've been talking about puns, and Charlie made a good case for puns, but I much prefer the semantic wordplay in Looking Glass, which is much more sophisticated. Ellie spoke about the Humpty Dumpty chapter, and one only has to look at that and compare that, say, with the arguments between Alice and the Mad Hatter, for example, and I think Humpty Dumpty wins out. So there is a kind of stylishness about Looking Glass, which I believe is really to do with the fact that he was able to create a book now which was not about trying to put down this story which he extemporized. We can never take away from Wonderland, nor should we, the fact that it was an extemporized story that was created in a particular magical moment, and that is what makes it special. But what you get in Looking Glass is him taking many of the same concepts and ideas and shaping them and crafting them towards something which itself, I think, is an immensely rewarding book to go back and reread and reread.
Right. And again, I wouldn't want anyone to interrupt anybody, but once someone finishes, if any of our panelists have something they want to jump in and add or, you know, challenge, please feel free. Ellie, which book has the more memorable characters?
Oh, that would be Looking Glass, absolutely. The already mentioned Humpty Dumpty, the beloved White Knight, the Gnat, the Red Queen with all her instructions. Definitely Wonderland.
I agree completely, absolutely.
Freudian slip. Definitely Looking Glass, definitely Wonderland has the inferior and fussier characters.
Mad Hatter, Cheshire Cat. And let me say that Looking Glass, many of the most memorable characters are not characters that Lewis Carroll invented. Humpty Dumpty already existed. Tweedledum and Tweedledee already existed. The Mad Hatter, the March Hare, the White Rabbit, the Cheshire Cat. Maybe
but he gave them life.
Oh,
he gave them personality that they did not have before.
Yes, but I think you've got to go Wonderland on this one, as Ellie so wisely said.
Actually, if I had more time, I wanted to find evidence that all of you liked the other book better, not better, but just I happened to be in possession of a photo of Ellie Luchinsky wearing a Mad Hatter hat. So I thought I was going to use that on one of the advertisements. Like, is she a spy? What's going on here?
One of the interesting things that comes out of interpretations of Alice, theatrical, filmic, whatever, is just how pressed people are when they're trying to put something on stage or on film to make those Wonderland characters appealing, because they are, if they're played in their natural way, they're aggressive and they're unpleasant. And you know, when Alice walks away, I mean, the Disney's the best example. Disney's madcap tea party scene with all that furore is a kind of, when Alice walks away and says this is the stupidest tea party in the world and rejects it, she's rejecting it because it's just insane clowning. But in the book, it's intimidating and really, I think it's got a tone which has an aggressiveness which you don't find in the confrontations all the time. There are bits with Tweedledum and Tweedledee, even with Humpty Dumpty, but by and large, the characters are much nicer. And when people try to put them on stage or film, they're really, really conflicted. That's why we have so many ridiculous tea party scenes and, you know, and ridiculous lobster quadrilles and things when people try to ham it up and make it funny, you know. Its funniness is not about likability necessarily.
If I could make two comments, one going back to the stylishness, I think, you know, Alice is really set up as an icon in Wonderland. Then we also have other characters, and it's been mentioned here, the Mad Hatter, and then of course the Caterpillar. I mean, and I think that incredible picture of the Cheshire Cat with Alice. And so it's not just Alice who becomes a style icon. But the other characters, I think, are more profound. I respectfully disagree with Brian. I find Looking Glass a far more hostile book. Jabberwocky, we have battle scenes. The kind of queen testing is really directed at Alice. I think if you look at Wonderland, it's a more threatening book.
All right. Which book has more memorable settings? And that is for you, Jan.
Well, you know, it seems to me, again, Wonderland, it just, you know, as I've repeated endlessly, the Mad Tea Party is just an amazing scene. I really like, you know, again, a lot of this is aesthetics. I think the caterpillar scene is so memorable that illustration by Tenniel, I think, is imprinted on everyone's mind, as well as a lot of T-shirts. That we get really interesting episodes in Looking Glass, and it kind of sticks with us.
I think, you know, the thing about the settings in Alice is this tremendous variety, from this unbelievably claustrophobic setting of you're a giant person in a tiny room with your foot up the chimney, to the least claustrophobic setting you can imagine, out on the beach with the griffin and the mock turtle. But I would certainly say there are fantastic settings in Looking Glass too, especially the aforementioned forest where things have no name. You know, so I think Dodgson is great at giving a variety of settings, and also at painting those settings with sort of minimal amount of language, and just, you know, being able to put us there very efficiently.
Well, I have to say a word here for the Garden of the Talking Flowers, which I think is one of the most masterful scenes in literature, really, with the different personalities of each flower coming out. They're not like en masse, they each have their own individuality. And then the scene with the Red Queen, with, you know, who gives her all her instructions for, you know, think while you twiddle your thumbs and so forth. It's, I prefer the scenes mostly in Wonderland, although I do have a very soft spot for the caterpillar, being only 3 inches tall myself.
You know, I think we have to give credit to Tenniel, because Tenniel gives so much of the details to the landscaping. And of course, the other one is the croquet game, which I think is really wonderful.
But what Looking Glass has that Wonderland doesn't have in the same way is a real theatricality, by which I mean it is like scenes in a play, but a play with quick changing scenes. I'm sure Dodgson was very, very influenced by going to the theatre and seeing lots of scene changes. You know, one minute you're with the Red Queen, the next minute you're in a railway train. How did you get in? Not only that, but you've changed your clothes. If you're Alice, you've got a different outfit on, and then you've lost that outfit again, and then suddenly you're in a shop, and the shop suddenly becomes a river with a boat, and the Queen becomes a sheep, and then you're back in the shop, and Humpty Dumpty is Humpty Dumpty, and it's not an egg, it's a person. So there are some amazing transformations in Looking Glass, which are much more theatrical. And I think in a way, in Wonderland, they feel to me, except with the exception, of course, of the seaside scene, which is somehow this rather awkward episode between the croquet game and the trial. I mean, there's no explanation of why that happens, other than that we needed to put that bit into the story. So, you know, the theatricality of Looking Glass, I think, wins out.
You know, someone just mentioned Tenniel, and I feel like maybe I should save this till the end because we could be here all day. But Charlie, you're up next in the order of the Zoom screen. Which book is a better showcase for Tenniel's artwork? And this came from like a million different sources. Everybody wants to know the answer to this.
Well, I mean, first of all, let's just give Tenniel props for all 92 illustrations. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant, and they add so much to both of the books. But again, I would say I do love, as Jan previously mentioned, in Wonderland, and I think this is Tenniel and Dodgson working together, the trick with the disappearing cat. And we know that Dodgson sort of liked that idea because he does the same thing again in the Wonderland postage stamp case. And I think to me, the iconic nature of Alice. I know I've been trying to watch the chat a little bit, and I know people have been talking about how Alice's fashion changes, and we've got this fantastic new book about that I just finished reading. It's just incredible. But the character of Alice, although she had visual predecessors, she is established really as Alice in Wonderland. And I don't think you can find another book that was illustrated in 1865 where everybody in 2021 still thinks of that character as looking like the way they did in 1865. I think that's an incredible tribute to Tenniel, and it happened in Wonderland to begin with.
Yes, but or yes, and I should say, the fact is, of course, that Looking Glass is where Tenniel really comes into his own, because he's not, as I indicated earlier, not shackled by what the illustrations look like in Alice's Adventures Underground. He has much greater freedom. Not only does he change Alice's fashion look, and somebody on the chat was just asking what that book is. The author of that book is Kira Vaklovic. I think she's actually on the chat line. So Kira, if you can put the title of your book up for people, that would be great. But also, if you think of the scenes like around the sundial in the illustration in Humpty Dumpty's chapter for the Jabberwock poem, what you see here is Tenniel letting loose his own imagination. He brings in, of course, a political cartoon by having Disraeli as the man in white paper in the railway carriage. So the other side of Tenniel actually bleeds into this. In many ways, I think it's a much more caricaturist book than Wonderland. It's got its real Tenniel voice in there in a way that he had to follow Dodgson's illustrations. And maybe actually when he was doing that job, which was work for pay for hire in Wonderland, maybe he didn't have quite the same investment in it as when he got round to Looking Glass. And although of course Dodgson was constantly interfering, but he didn't have the same feeling of having to be lumbered with these original illustrations which he had to somehow recreate. And sometimes in Wonderland doesn't pull it off, because for me the drawing by Dodgson of the Mock Turtle and the Griffin dancing the lobster quadrille is infinitely more exciting, surprising, and astonishing than the drawing that Tenniel comes up with.
If I could add something, the other thing is where we have Carroll's illustrations for Underground that we constantly are comparing with Wonderland. as many critics, Michael Hancher in particular, have pointed out, that so much of Tenniel is borrowed from his Punch work. And so there are prototypes of Alice that we see in Punch before it shows up in either Wonderland or Looking Glass. So in some ways, what I admire about Tenniel is he's a professional artist and recycles things in very interesting ways.
Is that a statement on our part for our side?
No, well, what it is a statement of truth. There are some standout illustrations in both books. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and say that the image of Jabberwocky is not wonderful. It's brilliant, okay? But so is the illustration of Alice and the caterpillar.
Well, I was going to raise the Jabberwocky out of his grave. But to me, that is really the epitome of all the illustrations in both books, is the Jabberwock wearing his waistcoat, just like the rabbit, and looking as threateningly unthreatening as you can possibly look.
Well, I would say that, even Carroll thought it was too hostile. And remember, it was supposed to be the frontispiece. He did a sort of test with 30 families and then moved it back. And we have, again, another good picture of the White Knight and Alice. But, it goes back to something I said earlier. I find Looking Glass a far more hostile and threatening environment than Wonderland.
And I think Jan's point is good too, that Dodgson's concern about whether it would be okay to use the Jabberwock as the frontispiece is a concern that we see throughout Looking Glass. He was worried perhaps that Looking Glass wasn't as good a book. He even allowed his illustrator to say to him, no, I think we should get rid of this bit with the wasp and the wig. And he's like, well, okay, you're probably right. So clearly there was some nervousness there,
Yes, some people are able to accept criticism and suggestions. It's their strength.
All right, next topic. And I'm keeping track of so many things here, but I've been reading the chat and you all have a lot of fans in the chat. There's a lot of here, and let's go. Next question. And Brian, we're on you're my next Zoom tile. And this comes from Debbie Vivari, which Debbie also sent in a lot of questions, which I appreciate so much. Which book has the more twisted logic?
Well, I have to say Looking Glass, and try to think on my feet as to why I would say that. They both have a lot of twisted logic, of course. I'm lost. I'm sunk. Sorry, I can't think of anything to say sensibly about that.
Well, I think the logic in Looking Glass is more consistent. It takes the idea of reversal, there's an internal consistency that adds to the twisting of the logic, I believe.
And the backwardness as well. I mean, the whole of that conceit about, which begin early on in the book, about walking away from the house, and the only way you can actually get away from the house is to walk towards it, and then you're walking away from the Looking Glass house, which is then picked up again by all the conversation with the White Queen about pricking her finger first, or the Hatter being in prison before he commits the crime, or handing around the plum cake before you cut it up. That's another very, very long. I mean, it's drawn out through the book. It's a piece of logic, playing with logic, which the author comes back to again and again. And I think that's not something you find in Wonderland, but they do both have their crazinesses of logic.
I think that one of the things I like about the logic in Wonderland is it gives Alice, the character, an opportunity to sort of speak truth to power, to call adults out on their stuff. And it also shows how this relationship between children and adults work. Adults lay down the law, children question it, and adults change the subject. And this happens over and over again, where she says, well, we move around one place, and she says, what do you get back to the dirty dishes? Well, suppose we change the subject. They lessened from day to day. Well, what did you do on the 11th day or whatever? Oh, well, suppose we change the subject. So whenever there's sort of a logical progression set out, she sees the fallacy in it, and then the adult sort of changes the subject. And I like the way that logic and character work together in Wonderland.
So I just saw a comment in the chat, which is very similar to one of our questions. So I'm going to skip ahead to that one. And I don't know if I agree with it, but Stephanie Atondo alleges, generally, Alice fans do not read Through the Looking Glass. Why? Is this Disney's fault? And someone in the chat just did say, I know a lot of people who don't even know, Through the Looking Glass is a sequel to it, to which Lindsay Fulcher wrote Barbarians. Anyway, and I'm sorry, I didn't direct that to anyone. Ellie, I believe you are next on the tile there. So do you think that the first book is read so much more, and why?
I think media has a lot to do with the fact that people don't realize they are two separate books. So you have, from Paramount to Disney to the unspeakable Tim Burton, that just blend them together willy-nilly. The only person who didn't do that was Irwin Allen, but it was so horrible otherwise that I just will pass over that. But I think people are confused by the portrayals in the media that blend them together and do not realize that there is a separate second book. Anyone who is hearing these fine gentlemen and two ladies talking about this should immediately go to the library, get a copy and read it promptly and aloud.
I noticed that somebody on the chat is saying that you take the best bits of Looking Glass and then chuck them in with the meat of Wonderland. But actually, that's not the case, because a number of the film people who've done this, as indeed with that first stage version, have called their film or their play Alice in Wonderland. The Paramount version does take the story through both books. It doesn't jumble them together in the way that Disney does. And yet it has that title, the one title. And of course, it is also the case that we've, as I hinted in my opening statement, is that the Looking Glass has lost its own title, because not Alice in Wonderland has lost her own title, because it is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and that got shortened to Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, and that is not the title of the book. It's not Alice Through the Looking Glass. So people even are confused because of publishers and because of the media, even about its title. Is there another book, or is it all part of that one book? So I think that's one of the reasons why. Just putting in a good word for somebody who did Wonderland, just Wonderland, which was Jonathan Miller, and how I wish he'd done Looking Glass as well.
Yeah, if I could add, I agree completely that Miller's film adaptation is the best, also the most Victorian. I think one of the other problems is so many publishers, to save money, put both books in one edition. And it seems, if you're an unsophisticated reader, that it just blends together. And I think something that Brian said early on, and something I said, there's a 7-year difference. They are very different books. They are both wonderful books, but very distinctive. And, I think it's unfortunate that some people are not aware of Through the Looking Glass. As I said in my opening statement, I'm both pro Wonderland and Looking Glass, but to blur them together is a real error.
Yeah,
and Jan's right, of course, because that 7-year gap is absolutely crucial, because when Wonderland was written, Lewis Carroll was not an established writer. He, in fact, didn't even have the book published by a publisher. He had it published at his own expense. When he was writing Looking Glass, he was an established writer. And most importantly, in terms of the creation of the stories, I think, is that psychological difference between the young man who wrote a story because it was a story which he had told to a particular child who loved it dearly and asked him to write it down as a favor to her, prompting him to take up the creativity which was always in this young man's psyche from the moment he was a child, and to express it in a book, to the man who 7 years later is now actually, when he wants to publish later an edition of Alice's Adventures Underground, is writing to his former child muse as Mrs. Hargraves. You know, this is a man who has, by that time, sadly, perhaps painfully, separated from that child, but he is now a different writer. Alice is a different character as a result of that. I mean, I don't mean the original Alice, well, she is different, but I'm talking about the literary Alice is different because it's seen through the eyes of a man who is now not the same man who wrote that first book.
I'd like to make a point about those 7 years too, because I think it speaks to the difference between the two books. The first book is written at a very happy time in Dodgson's life, a time he's just been ordained, he's been preaching, he's looking forward to he's a young man looking forward to his career. He has these lovely child friends that he loves spending time with, and he's remembering this very happy moment. Looking Glass, we don't know exactly the timeline for when Looking Glass was created, but we're pretty sure, based on correspondence with Tenniel at least, that at least some of it was created after his father's death in 1868, which by his own admission was the darkest time in his life. He stops preaching. He has doubts about things. He stops writing in his diary for weeks on end. And I think that shows. I think there is a darkness and as Jan said when we first started talking about it, a melancholy and a sort of sadness to Looking Glass as it looks backward, rather than, you know, Alice in Wonderland at the end looks forward to the future about what Alice's life as an adult is going to be like, whereas Looking Glass, I feel like, is a very sort of backward-looking book. And I think that's part of the difference between his mood in 1862, 3, 4 versus his mood in 1868, 9, 70. You know?
Well, and that
if I could add just one thing, you know, Wonderland is essentially written for Alice, but Looking Glass is essentially written for Lewis Carroll. And they're very different books. And in many ways, I think one of the faults of Looking Glass is it is melancholy and it is kind of sentimental. And Carroll, you know, has separated himself from Alice Lytle, but he has trouble letting go, and he keeps repeating the farewell scene. And so it repeats. And again, Ellie made a really good point where you take criticism and that shows the greatness of the writer. But thank goodness he edited out the wasp in the wig section, because I mean, it just repeats. I mean, it's sort of padding, and something that, you know, Carroll complains about in Sylvia and Bruno in the prologues. It seems to me there's a certain sadness with Looking Glass that you don't have in Wonderland.
But that sadness, I think, that melancholy, which you're both correct in saying is absolutely part of it, is part, for me, is part of its actual appeal. And the other thing about the book is that it seems to me to be the antithesis of Wonderland in a very particular way, in that Wonderland is very much a summer book. It was told on a summer expedition, whether it rained or not is beside the point. It was told in a summer situation, and it reflects that, the laziness of a summer day, lying in the grass, thinking about daisy chains, half asleep, half awake. But Looking Glass is a book which opens in autumn. It's quite clearly just before Guy Fawkes Night, November the 5th. It's heading towards Christmas. It's snowing. There's a sense of it being a quite separate book, a quite separate tone and style, in that it is a book which is reflective and internalized, and much more to do with reflection, which is why those passages which Jan has correctly referred to, such as the scene with the White Knight, which is, I think, one of the most moving chapters in the book. But not just there, but also in the reflection about how Alice remembers it subsequently, which is, of course, a repeat of the idea that's in Wonderland, but at the end of the book, as she reflects on that departure. And I think that, and I'd love to know what Charlie thinks, because he's been writing about the personality of Dodgson so recently, that seems to me to play really, really strongly into what we get about Dodgson through the book. Now, maybe that doesn't make it a better book or not, but it certainly tells us an awful lot about Dodgson's psyche at that point.
I think the question of which book tells us more about Dodgson's psyche is one we could probably talk about at great length. But since I'm arguing the Wonderland side, what I would argue is because Wonderland, so much of it is from a spontaneous storytelling place, and was sort of off the cuff, that perhaps that gives us a better view into his psyche. I think if I were not arguing either side, I would say that the books give us views into his psyche at different times of his life, and very different views because he was in very different places in life at the time.
And within Wonderland, even there is a difference. If you look at the chapters which were added for Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which aren't in Underground, including the Tea Party, for example, and the Cheshire Cat, you actually see a completely different tone of creativity going on to what you see when you read Underground, which is much more, as you're saying, Charlie, something that is just tripping off the tongue. You know, I always think of that moment when of Duckworth. Of course, it was years later, and he may have not remembered it accurately, but when he was writing about his memories of that trip, and he said, I remember him turning round to Dodson and saying, are you inventing this extempore as we're going along? And he said, yes, absolutely. And he himself was surprised that this story wasn't something, you know, that was just coming, as it were. Whereas I think that the chapter, Take the Mad Tea Party, which everybody adores, of course, is much more a sculpted, crafted chapter than some of the rest of the book. And I'd say that is a slight weakness. I always prefer all those episodes that are in Underground than those that are being shoehorned in afterwards.
I'm still here. I just felt like you guys just don't even need me. So actually, this is very related. And Jan, you're technically up next, but I imagine this will spark a whole other discussion. And you've all touched on it a little bit, but a few people want to know, let me see, how should I phrase this? Just which book did Carroll like better, and how do we know?
You know, I think we always love our first book. And as a first-time author, as someone who was paying for it for himself, I think he was really surprised and pleased that he extended the audience of Underground, of a reader of one, reframed it, and it was successful and popular. So I can't help but think that, you know, that was his favorite book. Though I'm pretty sure that he enjoyed all of his books, but I can't help but think the success and the relationship that it provided with, you know, Alice Liddell would make that his personal favorite.
And I think you also have to look at how he essentially marketed his work later on. He doesn't ever sort of try to market Looking Glass in any other way, but with Alice, he creates the Nursery Alice, and he creates the postage stamp case, and so we see him like continuing to sort of come back to that. And even, you know, you could argue that the facsimile of Underground is also coming back to that original story.
Okay, just waiting to see if anyone else wants to weigh in. Ellie?
Well, just because it is his personal favorite does not necessarily indicate that it is the better of the two.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just had to get that in there. I understand.
Oh, you bet.
And I just saw I think my very favorite comment in the chat section. Edward Giuliano says, bravo, arguably the finest discussion yet at any LCSNA meeting by the video. We certainly urge you all to do that. And we have gained about 15 attendees at some point. So I know I keep saying this, but just a reminder, if you want your comments to be seen by everybody, you have to pull down everyone from the little drop-down menu in the chat. Otherwise, it's just coming up to us panelists. So next question. This one I enjoy a lot. It's not really like a debate as in what's the better book, but it's just kind of something that makes you think. And I guess, Charlie, we are on you to start the discussion. Are Wonderland and Looking Glass the same place? And that comes from Kenneth Montfort via Facebook, I believe.
Yeah, this is a fascinating question. I've actually had it from a reader about some of my own books where they set in the same world. Would characters from one book be able to interact with or know characters in another world? And let me say as a preface, because I have been looking at some of the comments on the chat window, that I think all four of us love both of these books. You know, there's a certain created argument here that probably doesn't really reflect our feelings. But I think that personally, I think Wonderland and Looking Glass Land are two different places, but it's ultimately almost a metaphysical question. And I think so, therefore, it's a good time to mention, Brian mentioned metaphysics earlier in his talk. And I think, there are ideas about metaphysics, ideas about existentialism, ideas about just sort of the nature of human existence that are introduced in both of these books. And at the very beginning, almost of Alice, she's trying to imagine what a candle looks like, the flame of a candle looks like after it's been blown out. There's all these sort of references as trying to imagine what our existence would be if we didn't have our existence. And so, I think that to me is one of the things that fascinated me by Alice early on. But whether or not they're the same place, we have two characters who are sort of crossover characters, right? We have Hatta and Heya that would sort of seem to indicate that maybe there is some commerce between Wonderland and Looking Glass Land, but we certainly have a different royal house that seems to be in charge in the two different books, and in some cases different laws of what governs how the books work. Different games that show up. We have croquet and cards in one, and chess in the other. So I'm inclined to think that they're set in different, but perhaps slightly parallel universes in which there maybe is a little bit of a wormhole that you can kind of snaggle between one and the other.
There is a very specific fact about this, which is that one is called Wonderland. That's on the front of the book, although, as we know, it could have been called Elfland or many other options that Carroll was toying with. But what is the place in Looking Glass called? I believe, and I think I've got evidence for this, is that it's Looking Glass World. It's not Looking Glass Land, because in the song at the end, it's to Looking Glass World that Alice said. So, if that's the name of it, and of course we know from the preface to Hunting of the Snark, that Snark Island is somewhere, he says, off the place where the Jabberwock was slain. So, all of these places are, I think, as Charlie said, they're in a kind of wormhole distance from one another. And we should remember, of course, that Hatta and Hare are spelt differently to they are. It's only because Tenniel decided to give that Hatta a top hat with the same price label in it, which was his creation, not Lewis Carroll's. It's Tenniel's unique contribution to Wonderland. We have to say that, and therefore I don't blame him for hanging on to it in Looking Glass.
Right, Brian, and actually we're at almost 12:20. I would love to keep, and I think our attendees would love to keep the lightning round going for maybe like 5 more minutes, and then we'll get to closing statements. Are we all, Brian, I know you're in a very different time zone. Are you tiring? Are you okay?
It's 8:20 at night here, but yeah.
All right, excellent. All right, and then you are...
Just allow for my flagging energies.
If you ever want to say just pass, that's fine.
I think I did that earlier, so I don't think
it's true. Yes, I think you said I'm sunk. Yes, but actually you are next on the tile here. So which book has more of an influence on surrealism?
I don't think I can argue for Looking Glass in that respect, because if we're talking about surrealism, then I think in image-wise, then I think you're talking about all those images which are the things that are perhaps the least attractive in Wonderland, and therefore that doesn't necessarily make them better than what's in Looking Glass. Those distortions and transformations. But I think there is a lot of surrealism in Looking Glass, which is probably rather more sophisticated, well, sophisticated in a different way, because the surreal ideas that are in Looking Glass World are much more to do with linguistics and linguistic ideas and the use of semantics, rather than necessarily the kind of distortions that appear in Wonderland, which are reflective of what might be seen as an artistic surrealism. So I would say that it's probably less pictorial, but I don't think that surrealism only exists in a pictorial sense. I think the surrealist writing is influenced by, there are influences of that on other surrealists, but I think that Dodson's overall impact on surrealism is more powerful than many people would estimate or would value, but I think it's huge.
And I think the snark plays into that as well. You know, it's not just the Alice books where he has an impact on the surrealists.
And we were saying before we all got together and did this properly, we were just sort of making sure we were online. Sylvie and Bruno,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh,
if you look at episodes
Definitely.
of Sylvie and Bruno, they're wildly surreal.
All right, Ellie, you are up next. What's with that pained expression? All right. Which book is more quoted?
That's actually a very good question, but I'm probably going to have to go with Looking Glass on that, because we have, first of all, 'Twas Brillig, which you come across everywhere, the Humpty Dumpty section, which is to be the master, that's all. Jam today, or Jan today, Jan tomorrow, but never jam, you know, jam, blah, 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 getting tired.
There's no jam.
Jam yesterday, jam tomorrow, but never jam today.
And how many things can you remember before breakfast? And
Yes.
There are lots and lots of those quotes. Yeah.
But I think that, again, the point is worth making that both of the books are quoted and alluded to in so many different contexts, in media, in popular culture. And again, I think you'd be very hard pressed to find that two children's books written in the 1860s that are quoted at all.
Well, even great.
I've never counted it up, but you know, in the Alice birthday book where you have quotations from both books, which one is more? But I think, again, aesthetically, there's some great ones in Wonderland. There's some great ones in Looking Glass.
Yeah.
Well, this is just turning into some kind of love fest here. Come on, guys, you're losing your edge. Actually, the next question, we're on you, Jan, and I think this is perfect for the professor. This comes from an anonymous attendee today. Looking Glass is used to teach quantum physics. What can Wonderland be used to teach?
Narrative theory, a visual and verbal understanding. It seems to me that, linguistics is certainly used as examples. Frequently, it shows up in philosophy courses. And so there are a number of non-literary areas, but I think first and foremost, we see it in literature and talking about literary theory.
It's, I also there's a new book out that I just read, written by a professor here in High Point, that follows educational theory as played out in famous works of children's literature. It begins with, I believe it begins with Alice and it ends with Harry Potter. And it shows very interestingly how Wonderland can be taught, can be used to talk about particular types of educational theory.
All right, so we have some more questions, but yeah, we are definitely running long. And hopefully, if everyone, I didn't mention this before, but we are having a social hour afterwards. So I would love all of our attendees and as many of our panelists as possible to come, and we can just continue the discussion there. This last question, I really do want to treat it like a lightning round, just whatever comes in, everyone gets the same question and just whatever comes into your mind first. Charlie, what is the funniest moment in Wonderland?
Tea Party.
All right. Brian, funniest moment in Looking Glass?
Humpty Dumpty.
Ellie?
Oh, the Queen's test.
Good one. And Jan?
You know, I really like Pig and Pepper and when the baby is transformed into a pig.
Yeah, I think my moment would be very specific. Just the, did you say pig or fig? And just naturally accepts the answer. Everything's fine. All right.
Heather, could I just mention something? Somebody's just written on the chat line about the quotation the quotability of the book. And one of the things we were talking earlier about the blame that can be laid against the media for or people not understanding necessarily the scope and of the nature of the two books. But you know, here again, the quotes are incredibly muddled and confused. And if you look at anything on the internet, you'll happily find quotes from the Burton version, which are Linda Wolverton's dialogue, which are traded off as being, you know, by Lewis Carroll, and credited Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, or Through the Looking Glass. I mean, it's complete madness. Less so Disney, because Disney, in a bizarre way, some of the more quotes got into Disney than they did into Burton. But it is extraordinary. And you see it again with A.A. Milne, for example, the number of really, really toe-curling cute comments that are alleged to have been spoken by A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh, Piglet or Eeyore, which are now part of what people say is quotability. But that, of course, is part of what quoting becomes, because what Lewis Carroll was using in many cases was puns and ideas based on things that were current at their time. And so it has just got absorbed into it. And in a way, that is a measure of how great the books are, that they have, that their dialogue has now been transmuted by other people. And that in itself has now become a source of quotableness. So you can go into a Hallmark book, card shop and buy quotes from Alice, which are nowhere and have nothing to do with Lewis Carroll at all. But that's part of how the influence of this one book, or these two books together, have impacted on the world.
I believe if you don't know where you're going, Any Road Will Take You There is the one that drives me the most crazy. That was George Harrison, people. That was not Lewis Carroll. All right. All right. So if I remember back dimly in my memory to the beginning of this debate, I believe Wonderland went first. So for closing arguments, Charlie Lovett, would you like to take it away?
Absolutely. Well, I will simply defer to the great David Letterman and give you the top 10 reasons Alice in Wonderland is better than Looking Glass. We've mentioned quite a few of these so far, but number 10, Alice in Wonderland's characters are more original than those in Looking Glass. Number 9, Alice is a spontaneously told story versus a labored and failed attempt at structure. Number 8, Alice looks forward with happiness instead of backwards with melancholy. Number 7, Alice, we haven't talked too much about this one, has the greatest backstory in English literature, the story of its creation. And if you don't think it's a great story, I will just hold up a copy of the 1865 Alice, probably the first one ever showed on a Zoom meeting. And you'll see people going, ooh, ah, and you wouldn't go, ooh, ah, if it wasn't a great story. As I said before, I believe the poems in Alice are better integrated. I love the surprise ending of Alice. It surprised me as a child. And that while the ending of Looking Glass isn't exactly the same, it's still very much, oh, this was a dream narrative of some sort. Alice in Wonderland, I believe, has a happier view of childhood than Through the Looking Glass. And then we talked about this next one, number 3, quite a bit, that the combined versions always call it Alice in Wonderland. And you can see behind me on the poster, Alice in Wonderland. I mentioned that I believe that there is a longer and more interesting character arc for Alice in Wonderland than in Through the Looking Glass. And finally, as Jan said at the very beginning, Alice in Wonderland, number 1, was an absolutely revolutionary book in the history of children's literature and of literature. And so let me end by reading a poem that may or may not have been written by Lewis Carroll that I think sums up these 10 points. Looking Glass spends too much time with characters from nursery rhymes, while Wonderland's Cheshire Cat and Hatter provide originaler matter. Wonderland was off the cuff, not hung up on that chess game guff. In Looking Glass's melancholy, we Alice fans find writer's folly. Wonderland's creation story has earned it literary glory, but I think that I will take a pass on the genesis of Looking Glass. Looking Glass poems can stand alone, and that's because they are. But Wonderlandish poetry's more integral by far. Wonderland's ending's quite the number. I'm stunned to learn of Alice's slumber. But pull the same stunt twice and you are no better than the guy who wrote Rocky II. In Wonderland's cheerful pastoral with hay and cows and bushes floral, we look on childhood as first class, not weepy like in Looking Glass. On stage, on screen, though oft compressed, the title's always one that's best. Who needs a mirror on the marquee? Alice in Wonderland is enough for me. For those who seek a person's growth, you will not find the same in both. Alice matures in Wonderland. In Looking Glass, her arc is bland. Alice in Wonderland broke the mold. It's revolutionary gold. But molds cannot be broken twice. For me, the first time will suffice.
I'm sorry, I don't know why I turned my camera on early. I don't know why I thought the Rocky 2 line was the conclusion of that. But that was wonderful, Charlie. Thank you so much. And Ellie, you get the very last word today, closing arguments for Team Looking Glass.
Well, I can't, it's hard to follow an act like Charlie's, but I'm just going to have to be very serious and appeal to reason rather than flashiness. The internal consistency and superior poetry give Looking Glass a dimension lacking in Wonderland. The consistent theme of reversed images and actions adds another dimension. Also, the more active opening and the careful construction of the characters give Looking Glass a depth that Wonderland lacks. There is the melancholy of the gnat and the controlled acerbity of the Red Queen, which are extreme enough to be entertaining, but not so much to be annoying. The White Knight, with his wistful kindness, creates a sympathetic response with both Alice and the reader. The White Queen has her own internal and confused logic, aside from her predilection for bread and butter. Humpty Dumpty has his opinions on the function of names foreshadowed in The Woods with No Names. Alice herself is calmer and more able to converse with the characters than she is in Wonderland. Instead of the disjointed back and forth with the Hatter and Hare, her conversation with Humpty Dumpty follows an actual path, although it's laid out with hairpin turns. Finally, the less sentimental and more philosophical ending, which cites the dream of the Red King, has led to speculation by such luminaries as Bertrand Russell.
Thank you, Ellie. Now, I know I said you'd get the last word, but I'm going to launch our post-debate poll, and I want to give our attendees a chance to answer, of course. So no pressure, just more discussion. I'm wondering, and anyone can answer first, do you remember the first time you read either Alice's Adventures in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, and about how old were you at the time? Oh, Brian, I think you're talking. If you can unmute. Yeah.
I certainly remember. I had a huge book. I'm always hoping that one of my better known or better collected collector friends might be able to find me a copy. 4 years old, something like that. And somebody gave me a book which was a kind of big red book. It probably wasn't that big because I was only 4 years old, but it seemed big. And it was a kind of anthology of poems and stories and puzzles and all kinds of things. And Alice's Adventures, Wonderland, this is, was serialized through the book. So you met the story chapter by chapter as you went through it. And I don't know why, but this story appealed to me more than anything else in this big book of stories. And whenever a relative came, I'd hunt this book out. This is before I could read myself, and say, read me this. And, you know, as children always do, I knew the book better than they did when they were reading. And I always caught them out when they tried to skip a few paragraphs or turn a couple of pages. And I didn't find Looking Glass for several more years. And when I did, it was to have the book with both, a volume with both books in it, but without Tenniel's illustrations. So I knew Tenniel's illustrations for Wonderland, but not Looking Glass. And when I discovered those illustrations, they, to me, then became very, very special, because I really regretted not having had the Tenniel Looking Glass characters as part of my world when I was young. But Wonderland suckered me in, as it obviously did for Charlie, because he was talking very strongly about how it impacted on him. So it impacted on me. And I don't know whether Charlie feels the same, but I've always felt that I never in any way, and maybe at 4 years old I wasn't that conscious of boys and what the difference was between boys and girls at that age, being a single child. But for me, she was just a character a character that I cared about and involved myself with and really, really liked. I never ever thought of her by gender, and have never really thought of her by gender since, unlike many, many other feminine characters in children's books. So for me, yes, it's powerfully Wonderland, which is odd that I should have ended up just arguing on the other side. But Looking Glass came to me as something different because I was a little bit older, maybe slightly more receptive to thoughts rather than events and ideas and dramatic happenings. And then I found that the two books complemented themselves. And what I would just say is, you know, that when Looking Glass ends, the closing poem with that line, what is this life if but a dream? That to me there's such potency in that, and that is the point at which Lewis Carroll put down his pen from writing those stories. But he didn't finish his journey there. And when you look at the opening dedicatory acrostic to Sylvie and Bruno, what's the first line then? What is this life then? What is this life then but a dream? So he picks up the question that he asked himself at the end of Looking Glass, almost as a statement of fact that this is the case, but then visits that again, and his life, his creativity, his dreaming, and our dreaming continues.
And I think that, well, first of all, I so agree with what you said about Alice not being a gender-specific book. There are very few books, especially from that period, but where there's a female heroine and it doesn't feel like a girl's book, and Alice doesn't feel like either a girl's book or a boy's book. As you heard, I first heard Alice on records. It was years before I ever read Alice and discovered what was in those places where the record had skips. You know, that was a revelation for me. And I didn't read Looking Glass until I was an adult and started collecting the books. And so I did come to it with a more mature feeling. But to Brian's point about life, what is it but a dream? I mean, this is a theme throughout Lewis Carroll's life. When he was 15 years old, one of his schoolmasters died, and the headmaster stood up in the pulpit of the Rugby Chapel and began his sermon by saying, "What is our life? Is it just a dream?" And then, of course, we see in the Easter greeting where he's very explicit about seeing life on earth as a dream and resurrected life as waking from that dream. And so it's and then again through the Alice books, through Sylvie and Bruno, it's a theme that he returns to again and again.
Anything to add, Ellie or Jan?
I honestly don't remember not knowing Alice, but I became acquainted with the other works by Lewis Carroll when I was about 14, and became totally hooked on syllogisms. But honest, I had, like Charlie, I had talking records of it. I remember seeing it on TV. I remember reading Golden Book versions of it. It was just always a part of my life.
I can remember, and I still have it, it was my parents' modern library edition. It's a blue covered book. And it was before I could read. And one of the things that has always impressed me with both Alice books is they are the combination of Carroll and Tenniel. And I would just spend lots of time just looking at those images, and those images just became alive for me. And so one of the things I value both in Wonderland and Looking Glass is that collaboration of the visual and verbal.
Can I just come back on what is our life then but a dream? Because Lindsay Fulcher points out in the chat, and I should have remembered it because I was at the event and read at it, that the words that are on the memorial tablet in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey is all our life then but a dream. But when we were proposing what words should go on that tablet, we began with is all our life then but a dream from Looking Glass poem. And the church authorities would not allow that. They found it too contentious. But when we offered them the opening words, the acrostic in Sylvia and Bruno, is all our life then but a dream? So it was a question, more obviously a searching question, which suggested that no, it is not. It's much more than that. They accepted it. So that's why the words from probably the lesser of those two, lesser known of those two poems, is on the memorial tablet, not the words from the conclusion of the Looking Glass poem. Which is the curiosity.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share our polls, the results. So here's the pre-debate poll. And it's kind of anticlimactic. They're pretty much the same. I'll be honest with you. And it's funny, when I first started doing social media for the LCSNA, I did put up a poll, but it was only two choices, and Wonderland won. It was 75% to 25%. But this is showing me that if there had been a third option of don't make me choose or I love them both, that appears like that would be the most popular answer for sure. And let me find the post-debate poll. Here we go. Post-debate, it kind of looks the same. Oh, and of course, everybody has won and all must have prizes was the most popular answer for who won the debate.
As it should be.
Yes, I was not expecting anything different. This was so wonderful today. I really hope that you all have inspired our other, I don't know what the word would be, our other Carrollian superstars in the audience to maybe want to take part in one of these in the future. It doesn't have to be a debate, but just these roundtables, I think was the most fascinating part here. And our audience is obviously just so engaged. So thank all four of you so much. Charlie Lovett, Brian Sibley, Ellie Luchinsky, and Jan Susina. So appreciate you being here today and giving us so much of your time. And everyone, I am about to put the link for our social hour in the chat. And it's also in the email you got yesterday or the day before. And it's always a good idea. I always try to copy and paste that meeting ID and passcode in case the link doesn't work or something like that. But you can join us all. I think at least a few of our panelists will be there momentarily. And thank you all for watching today. And oh, one of our panelists already took off. There we go. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again to our panelists. And hopefully I will see you all in just a few moments. Bye-bye.
Oh, fra bjöste kalu kale, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All the whimsy were the borrow goves, and the mummer so gay.